Students, today we discuss the remaining part of reptiles, aves, mammals and rabbit external characters up to digestive system. We already discussed regarding the rabbit in the EAMCET examination. From the entire part of rabbit, we are getting at least 6 marks. From the general characters and classification, we are getting the 4 marks. As we observe the rabbit external characters up to the digestive system, while we are discussing each and every question, around each question we have to discuss the related important bits. In this class, we are going to complete the remaining part of reptiles, aves, mammals and rabbit introductory part up to the digestive system. Now we go for the first bit. Now you have to observe the first bit. In the following sequence, the process of digestion takes place in orictolagus as per of digestive juices from buccal cavity to the intestine. Again I am repeating the question. In the following sequence, the process of digestion takes place in orictolagus. What is the genus name of rabbit? Orictolagus. What is the species name? Cuniculus. Now in the body of rabbit, what is the sequence of process of digestion takes place as per digestive juices from the buccal cavity to the intestine. Now again you observe the options: highly acidic, alkaline and slightly acidic medium. Now as we observe the alimentary canal of rabbit, one part we call it as buccal cavity. In the buccal cavity, what type of digestive juice is present? The saliva. Now the second part we call it as stomach. In the stomach, what type of digestive juice is present? The gastric juice. Now this part we call it as the intestine. In the intestine, what type of juices are present? One is the bile juice and the second one is pancreatic juice and the third one is intestinal juice. Now as we observe the bile juice, in the bile juice the enzymes are totally absent. In the pancreatic juice and in the intestinal juice, the enzymes are present. Bile juice, pancreatic juice and intestinal juice, they are alkaline in nature. What about the gastric juice? The pH of gastric juice 1.5 to 2. What about the saliva? It is slightly acidic. The pH is 6.9. Now based on this information, we have to observe in the following sequence, the process of digestion takes place in the rabbit as per digestive juices from buccal cavity to the intestine. Now in the buccal cavity, the saliva slightly acidic. In the gastric juice, it is highly acidic. What about the bile juice, pancreatic and intestinal juice? They are alkaline. Now based on this information, arrange the digestive juices in a correct sequence. One is slightly acidic, the next one is highly acidic and the last one we call it as alkaline. Now based on this information, the correct answer is slightly acidic, highly acidic and alkaline. Now we go for the next question. Autocatalysis is shown by. Autocatalysis is shown by. Where we have to observe the autocatalysis. Now this one we call it as pepsinogen. It is inactive form. Pepsinogen converted into pepsin. It is active form. It is proenzyme. It is enzyme. Now here the activator is HCl. Now this pepsin converts the remaining pepsinogen into the pepsin. Now here what is the activator? The pepsin. Now the process of conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin, that we call it as autocatalysis. What is the second example? Now this is trypsinogen. It is proenzyme. The trypsinogen converted into the trypsin. Some amount of trypsinogen converted into trypsin. Here the activator is enterokinase. Now this trypsin converts the remaining trypsinogen into the trypsin. Now here what is the second activator? The trypsin. The process of conversion of trypsinogen into trypsin by trypsin, that we call it as autocatalysis. Here as we observe the pepsin is activator as well as enzyme. What about the trypsin? It is the activator as well as the enzyme. The conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin by pepsin, that is autocatalysis. The conversion of trypsinogen into trypsin by trypsin is autocatalysis. Now here you have to observe the question. Autocatalysis is shown by, one example is pepsin, one example is trypsin. Now we go for the next question. As we observe the next question, Stensen's ducts are. Now as we observe the salivary glands of rabbit, now this is the head of rabbit and these are the teeth of rabbit. As we observe the teeth of rabbit, this is upper incisor, lower incisor, and rabbit is herbivore, so canines absent, and these are the premolars and these are molars. Now the upper row has incisors, premolars, molars. The lower row has incisor, premolars and molars. Now this is the angles of lower jaw, and this one we call it as the tongue. T means tongue, and these are angles of the lower jaw, and these are one pair of external ears, and this is orbit of eye. We are having some idea regarding the salivary glands. At the base of external ears, what type of salivary glands are present? They are called parotid salivary glands. Now at the angles of lower jaw, what type of salivary glands? Submaxillary salivary glands. And below the tongue, what type of salivary glands? The sublingual salivary glands. At the base of orbit, what are present? Infraorbital salivary glands are present. Now we know very well, in all mammals, 4 pairs of salivary glands present, but in case of human being, only 3 pairs. What type of salivary glands are absent? Infraorbitals. Now, at the base of external ear, parotid salivary glands are present. The parotid salivary glands open behind upper incisors with the help of what type of ducts? Stensen's ducts. The submaxillary salivary glands open near lower incisors with the help of Wharton's ducts. Now based on this information, here Stensen's ducts are, the answer is the parotid glands at the base of external ears open behind upper incisors with the help of Stensen's duct. Now here what is the correct answer? The ducts of parotid glands opening behind upper incisors. So the correct answer is the fourth option. Now we go for the next question. Match the following. List 1 Rhinarium. Second one Vibrissae. They are also called whiskers. Third one is nictitating membrane. And the fourth one we call it as hair lip. Now based on this information, as we observe the head of rabbit, the head of rabbit consisting one pair of external nostrils. The external nostrils lined inside by mucous membrane, that we call it as rhinarium. Now the next one is Vibrissae. Now this one we call it as the upper lip. The upper lip has a longitudinal slit. The upper lip is called the hair lip. Now on the margin of upper lip, what are present? The long, stiff, tactile hairs are present. They are called Vibrissae. They are also called whiskers. Now the third one is nictitating membrane. Now as we observe the head of rabbit, on either side one pair of eyes are present. Now this is upper eyelid and this is lower eyelid. The upper eyelid having eyelashes, the lower eyelid having eyelashes. Now we are also having the upper eyelid and lower eyelids having eyelashes. Now at the anterior corner, what is present? The third eyelid. The third eyelid, it does not possess eyelashes. The third eyelid moves forward, backward and protects the eyeball against the dust particles. But in our body, the third eyelid nictitating membrane is vestigial. Now as we observe the third eyelid in our body, at the anterior corner of eye, a fleshy lobe is present, that we call it as the third eyelid or nictitating membrane. In our body, the third eyelid is vestigial. But in case of rabbit, at the anterior corner, third eyelid present, but it does not possess eyelashes. It moves forward, backward and protects the eyeballs against the dust particles. Now based on this information, now what is the correct answer for this question? That is the fourth option. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. The liver is the principal organ of biochemical reactions. Now as we observe the liver in case of mammal's body, in our body, this part we call it as diaphragm. Above diaphragm, this part we call it as the thorax. Below diaphragm, what is present? Abdomen. Now, below diaphragm, on one side, what is present? The 5-lobed liver is present. Now this is the right side, this is the left side. On the right side, how many lobes? 2 lobes. On the left side, how many? 3 lobes. Total number of lobes in the liver, 5. The liver is also called hepatic organ. Now in all vertebrates, what are the vertebrates? Pisces, amphibians, reptiles, aves, mammals including the man. In all vertebrates, only the liver has the limited power of regeneration. Suppose if a part of liver is cut off, again it is regenerated. Now as we observe the liver, it is the main center of biochemical reactions. It means carbohydrate metabolism, protein metabolism, fat metabolism. All these are taking place in the liver. Without liver, these food materials metabolism is going to stop. Based on this, now the assertion, liver is the principal organ of biochemical reactions. Reason, carbohydrates, lipids and protein metabolism takes place in the liver. So both are correct. R explains A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion, cardiac gastric glands and pyloric gastric glands secrete non-enzymatic secretions. Now as we observe the gastric glands, in the gastric glands as we observe, now this part we call it as the esophagus and this one we call it as the stomach. Now in the body of vertebrates, as we observe the alimentary canal, in the alimentary canal, what is the largest part? That we call it as the stomach. The stomach is considered as a reservoir. In the stomach, the food materials are temporarily stored. So it is a reservoir. In the stomach, the digestion takes place, but partial digestion. Now the stomach is classified into three parts. One we call it as, this is the cardiac stomach, and this is the fundic stomach, and this one we call it as the pyloric stomach. Now as we observe cardiac, fundic and pyloric stomach, in the pyloric stomach the mucosa has only the mucus cells. Here the mucus cells secrete the mucin. What about the cardiac stomach? The cardiac stomach, here also the mucosa has the mucus cells. The mucus cells secrete only mucin. But as we observe the fundic stomach, in the fundic stomach different cells are present. The cells will secrete the HCl and inactive pepsinogen and inactive prorenin and some hormones and the mucin and Casil's intrinsic factor. Students, again you have to observe the diagram. Regarding the assertion, cardiac gastric glands and pyloric gastric glands, in the cardiac stomach as well as in the pyloric stomach, the gastric glands are present. Where gastric glands are present? In the mucosa. Now in the pyloric and cardiac stomach, the gastric glands having only mucus cells. The mucus cells will secrete the mucin. You have to observe from the pyloric stomach, from the cardiac stomach, no type of enzymes. But in the fundic stomach, the fundic stomach, the gastric glands having the cells, they secrete HCl, inactive pepsinogen, inactive prorenin, different hormones, mucin and Casil intrinsic factor. Now based on this, cardiac gastric glands and pyloric gastric glands secrete non-enzymatic secretions, because in these two areas the glands have only the mucus cells and secrete only the mucus. Now both are correct. R explains A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion, even though gastric lipase is present, but only small chain of triglycerides are digested in the stomach. Again, I am repeating the assertion. Even though gastric lipase is present, but only small chain of triglycerides are digested in the stomach. Now, as we observe the physiology of digestion, now the largest part we call it as stomach. In the stomach, what type of digestive juice is present? The gastric juice we know very well. Now in the gastric juice, what are the components? One is HCl, it is acid. What is the second one? The prorenin, that is inactive form of renin. And pepsinogen, it is inactive form of pepsin. It is proenzyme, it is acid and mucin and different hormones. And next one is Casel's intrinsic factor. In addition, in the gastric juice, what is present? The lipase is present. Here the lipase is called gastric lipase because it is present in the gastric juice. Now as we observe the lipase, in the gastric juice, the lipase digests small chain of triglycerides, because whenever the lipase is going to work effectively, whenever the lipids undergo emulsification. What is meant by emulsification? The process of conversion of large fat molecules into small fat molecules. Again I am repeating. What is meant by emulsification? The large fat molecules become small fat molecules. That is called emulsification. For the emulsification, what is required? The bile salts. Where bile salts are present? In the bile juice. But here we are discussing what type of digestive juice? Gastric juice. In the gastric juice, no bile salts. So that as we observe the stomach, in the stomach gastric juice present, in the gastric juice the lipase present. But without emulsification, the lipase unable to digest effectively the lipids. So that here the gastric lipase digests only small chain of triglycerides, because in the stomach there is no bile juice, there is no bile salts, there is no emulsification. So you observe the reason. For the digestion of fats, emulsification is required, which does not occur in the stomach. So in the stomach or in the gastric juice, the lipase digests only small chain of triglycerides. So both are correct, or he explains A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion: semi-solid feces is formed in colon. Now as we observe the alimentary canal of mammals, this part we call it as the mouth. The mouth opens into vestibule. Vestibule opens into buccal cavity. Buccal cavity opens into pharynx. It opens into esophagus. It opens into the stomach. It opens into the duodenum. And this part is ileum. And this is called the sacculus rotundus. And this part we call it as the cecum. At the tip of cecum, what is present? Vermiform appendix. And this one we call it as the colon. And this part we call it as the rectum. And this is anal canal, and this is anus. Now this is one rearrangement of question from anterior to posterior. arrange the parts of alimentary canal in a sequence from anterior to posterior. Mouth, vestibule. Vestibule present only in mammals. It is followed by buccal cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, duodenum, ileum, sacculus rotundus. From the sacculus rotundus, on one side cecum arises, on other side the colon arises. Now, as we observe the colon, in the colon, the undigested food material present. Here, UDF means undigested food materials. Now, in the colon, the reabsorption takes place. After completing the reabsorption, this undigested food material becomes the feces or the fecal matter. Now here, what is the assertion you have to observe? Semi-solid fecal matter is formed in the colon, because in the colon, what is going to occur? Colon reabsorbs water from the undigested food materials. After reabsorption of water, such undigested food material converted into semi-solid feces or fecal matter. So both are correct or explains A. Now the answer is both are correct or explains A. We go for the next question. Assertion: ascorbic acid deficiency leads to bleeding of gums, of teeth and hemorrhages. Now again I am repeating. Ascorbic acid. Now as we observe the vitamins are broadly classified into two categories. One we call it as fat soluble vitamins. They are vitamin A, D, E, K. And second type of vitamins are called the B complex vitamins and vitamin C. Now what is meant by ascorbic acid? It is nothing but vitamin C. Now ascorbic acid deficiency, generally where vitamin C is available, the vitamin C is generally available in all citrus fruits. For example, mango, grapes, etc. In all these citrus fruits, the vitamin C is abundant. Now the vitamin C is also called ascorbic acid. Suppose vitamin C absent in our body, what is going to happen? As we observe the gums, from the gums we are getting the bleeding and hemorrhage. Easily the skin ruptures, that is called hemorrhage. The hemorrhage leads to the bleeding. Now the reason: vitamin C is essential to maintain the integrity of endothelium. Now as we observe the blood vessels in our body, what are the blood vessels? One is arteries, veins and capillaries. Now as we observe the blood vessel, in the blood vessel three layers are present. Now this is the wall of blood vessel. In the wall three layers are present: tunica externa, tunica media and tunica interna. The tunica interna is called endothelium. Now as long as vitamin C is present, the endothelium integrity. What is the integrity? The strength of endothelium. The integrity of endothelium is maintained by vitamin C. If such vitamin C is absent, automatically the blood vessels are subjected to hemorrhage. So we are getting the bleeding. Based on this information, A and R are correct or explains A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion: male rabbit is polygamous. Now as we observe the external characters of rabbit, the male rabbit, this mark indicates the male. Now the male rabbit is said to be the polygamous. What is meant by polygamous? One male rabbit engages with many female rabbits. One male rabbit engages with many female rabbits. That condition we said to be polygamous. This polygamous condition is also explained where? One example is the flightless birds. The flightless birds. In the flightless birds, one example is the African ostrich, and the second example is the American ostrich. What are the examples for the polygamous? What is meant by polygamous? One male rabbit engages with many females. That condition we call it as polygamous. With reference to mammals, what is the classical example for the polygamous? Rabbit. Regarding the birds, what are the classical examples for polygamous? African ostrich and American ostrich. Now, based on this information, both are correct and R explains A. Now we go for the next question. Again, assertion. Oryctolagus cuniculus. We know very well, it is the scientific name. Oryctolagus genus, cuniculus is species. We know very well what is the common name? Rabbit. Now, the rabbit is crepuscular. Reason: Oryctolagus cuniculus is active during dawn and dusk. It means in the early hours of the day and in the evening time. Again repeating, in the early hours of the day and in the evening time, the rabbit is very active. The rabbit is considered as a good entertainer. And as we observe the rabbit, if we observe the biological systems of the rabbit, we can understand all systems of the vertebrates. Now the body of rabbit is covered by fur. Here we should not use the word hair. The body of rabbit is covered by fur. So in the body of rabbit, what are absent? Hairs are absent. Instead of hair, we have to use the word fur. The fur is used in the preparation of so many articles, and the rabbit flesh is very tasty and delicious. It gives recreation, so it is entertainment pet. Now based on this information, the rabbit is very active in the early hours of the day and in the evening time, so that it is crepuscular. Both are correct. Or explains A. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. Oryctolagus is considered as autocoprophagous animal. Now, as we observe here, one word is called coprophagous. What is meant by coprophagous? Coprophagous means the animal eats on fecal matter. If the animal eats the fecal matter of another animal, that we call it as coprophagous. What is the classical example? That is pig. The pig eats the fecal matter of all animals, so it is coprophagous. But here, as we observe the rabbit is said to be autocoprophagous feeder. As we observe the life history of rabbit, during the night time, it releases the feces. During the night time, the rabbit releases the fecal matter. Now in the fecal matter, what are present? Some important nutrients and some metabolites are present. These nutrients are metabolites responsible for the further digestion of cellulose. So, as we observe the life history of rabbit, only during the night time the rabbit eats its own fecal matter, because in the night time the fecal matter released by the rabbit consisting some important useful metabolites and nutrients. These metabolites and nutrients are responsible for the digestion of cellulose. So, it eats the fecal matter of its own during the night time. As it eats its own fecal matter, it is called autocoprophagous feeder. Now, assertion. Rabbit is considered as autocoprophagous animal. It is the habit of feeding on their own feces. So, both are correct or explains A. Now, we go for the next question. Assertion. Rabbit collects the sound waves from all directions. Now, as we observe the general body plan of rabbit, now this part we call it as the head of rabbit. Now, this is the neck, and this part we call it as the trunk. Now, this is called the trunk, and this part is called the neck, and this part is called the head. The trunk is classified into two regions. One we call it as thorax, one we call it as abdomen. At the posterior part of abdomen, what is present? The anus. Beyond anus, what is present? The tail is present. Now, these are one pair of the forelimbs and one pair of hind limbs. Now, as we observe the forelimbs, here the forelimbs are shorter than that of hind limbs. Now, this is anterior part of head. This anterior part we call it as snout. Now, on either side of head, what are present? The large eyeballs are present. Behind the eyes, on either side of the head, what are present? The large external ears. But we are having the small external ears. In our body, the ears are not movable, because the muscles which are present in the external ears are vestigial. So, in the body of a human being, we are unable to move our ears. But as we observe the rabbit, in the rabbit, the external ears are large. What is the shape of external ears? The shape of external ears is spout. These are external ears. The external ears are also called pinnae. Now, as we observe the body of rabbit, the external ears are very large. The external ears are independently movable. Because of the presence of large external ears, the rabbit can receive the sound vibrations from the surrounding environment. But in our body, as we observe the external ears, they are small in size. We are unable to move our external ears, because in our body, in the external ears, the muscles are vestigial. Now, based on this information, rabbit collects the sound waves from all the directions, because the pinnae or external ears of rabbit can be moved independently. So, both are correct or explains A. Now, we go for the next question. The incisors of rabbit are persistent as they grow continuously. Now, as we observe the teeth of rabbit, in the body of mammals, 4 kinds of teeth are present. One we call it as incisors. We know very well, incisors indicated by I, followed by canines represented by C, followed by premolars and molars. Now, as we observe the incisors, they are broad with chisel edge. These are incisors, and these are the canines. They are curved and pointed. What about the premolars and molars? the premolars and molars having cusps. What is the meaning of the cusps? Folding. Now, as we observe the incisors, now this is the pulp cavity of incisor. This is the pulp cavity. Now, in the body of rabbit, the opening of pulp cavity, is wider. So, as we observe the body of the rabbit, throughout the life, the incisors exhibit growth. But as we observe in our mouth cavity, the first teeth are called incisors, followed by canines, premolars and molars. In case of rabbit, the incisors persistent. What is meant by persistent? They grow continuously throughout the life. Why the incisors exhibit a continuous growth? As we observe the incisors, the pulp cavity opening is wider. So, a continuous supply of blood for the incisors. So, throughout the life, they exhibit the growth. Now, you observe the assertion. The incisors of the rabbit are persistent as they grow continuously. It is correct. Assertion is correct. What about the reason? The opening of pulp cavity in the incisors narrow. But what I said, the opening of pulp cavity is wider. So, A is correct, R is false. Here, what is the correct answer? If the assertion in the reason, if the pulp cavity opening is wider, both are correct, R explains A. But here in the reason, the pulp cavity opening is narrow. So, A is correct, R is false. Now, we go for the next question. Assertion. The stomach accommodates larger amount of food materials. Now, as we observe the stomach of vertebrates, now as we observe the largest part of alimentary canal, that we call it as stomach. Now, we go for the transverse section of stomach. As we observe the transverse section of stomach, the first layer is serosa, and the second layer we call it as the muscularis, and the third one we call it as submucosa, and the innermost layer we call it as the mucosa. Now, the mucosa consisting what type of epithelium? Simple columnar epithelial cells. Now, as we observe the innermost layer of mucosa, it has the foldings. These are called the foldings. Now, these foldings are called rugae. Here, what is the function of the rugae? The rugae increases the volume of stomach depending upon the amount of food materials. Sometimes we take more and more amount of food materials. If we take more and more amount of food materials in our body, the stomach accommodates such large amount of food materials, because in the stomach the innermost layer is mucosa. The mucosa has finger-like foldings. The finger-like foldings are called rugae. The rugae increase volume of stomach depending upon the amount of food materials. Now, the stomach accommodates larger amount of food materials. Rugae allow expansion of the volume of stomach. So, both are correct, or explains A. Now, we go for the next question. Assertion. Regurgitation of food materials from stomach to esophagus is not take place. Now, as we observe the parts of alimentary canal, this one we call it as the esophagus. Now, the esophagus opens into the stomach. Now, it is the convexity, it is concavity. Now this part we call it as cardiac stomach, we know very well, and this is the fundic stomach, and this is the pyloric stomach. Now the esophagus opens into cardiac stomach through an aperture called cardia. Students, the esophagus open into cardiac stomach through an opening called cardia. Now this cardia is guarded by a sphincter. This is called posterior esophageal sphincter. Now as we observe this sphincter allows food materials from esophagus to cardiac stomach, but this sphincter does not allow the food materials from cardiac stomach to esophagus. What is the other name of posterior esophageal sphincter? It is also called the cardiac sphincter. Now students, as we observe the stomach, in the stomach how many sphincters are present? 2 sphincters are present. One we call it as cardiac sphincter, one we call it as pyloric sphincter. But in the textbook, the cardiac sphincter is named as posterior esophageal sphincter. So cardiac sphincter as well as posterior esophageal sphincter both are one and the same. In the sphincters, what type of muscles are present? The smooth muscles are present. Now as we observe the assertion, regurgitation of food materials from stomach to esophagus is not allowed because the posterior esophageal sphincter prevents backward flow of food from stomach to esophagus. It means this sphincter allows food material esophagus to cardiac stomach. The arrow mark indicates passage of food materials from esophagus to cardiac stomach. Based on this information, both are correct or explains A. Now we go for the next question.